And that means we are underway. So welcome everybody to another session of Parlor Car Chats. We are, of course, a program of the San Luis Obispo Railroad Museum, as you can see from this first slide. And I want to remind you of that for two reasons. A, so you know who's doing these things, and B, so that if you feel motivated, you can drop a little money towards the San Luis Obispo Railroad Museum to help them with the fact that they've gone almost a year now with pretty much zero operating income. So that would be great. And on that front page, you can see some various links and locations where you can do that kind of donating. On this next slide, this is just a reminder to those of you who have been here before and to tell anybody new, if you want to communicate with me during this talk, this is the way to do it. Use the chat feature on the free conference call video screen. And it looks like that red circled thing. It either has the word chat or that little talking bubble or both. And if you don't see it on your screen, you might have to hover your mouse over the video window to see it. But once you're there, then you can talk to basically everybody, ask a question, make a comment, and I'll try to keep an eye on that. So if I see something come in, I mention it to everybody. So that's about chats. About chatting during one of these chats. Okay, so our topic for today is called Remnants of the Railroads of the Santa Maria Valley, or as our fearless leader, Kevin O'Rourke's wife, always said, "Oh, great, honey, you're going out to see stuff that isn't there anymore." And that's exactly true, although it's not entirely true. We'll see as we go along here that there are some things that are still there that you can see, but not very many. This slide is up to point out or indicate that I think most of the material that Kevin shared during these field trips, and there were many of them, I'll talk about that another slide down the road, the info came from one or both of these two books. One on the left, Railroads of the Santa Maria Valley by Hal Madsen, who passed away some number of years ago. He was very connected to the Santa Maria Valley Railroad, good friend of the railroad, good friend of the Friends of the Railroad. And that book is a great book if you want to learn stuff about the three California railroads that we'll be mentioning today. And then on the right is a very well-known book, The Pacific Coast Railway, Central California's Premier Narrow Gauge, written by Ken Westcott and Kurt Johnson. And Kurt is with us today, by the way. Thank you, Kurt, for joining us. Thank you, Kurt and Ken, for writing that book. It's absolutely fabulous if you want to learn about that railroad. So just so we make it clear where all this information is coming from. And speaking of Kevin, there he is during one of the field trips as we were driving from one spot to another. Just to give you a picture of what it involves going from spot to spot, and these pictures are drawn from a number of field trips that covered to like 2011 through 2019, something like that. And lots of information. In fact, Kevin always had a guidebook, as you can see in his left hand there, that he gave to everybody to follow along with. It was for educational purposes only. He didn't let that out because a lot of the material was copyrighted. So in order to get a hold of that booklet or guidebook that he put together, you had to go on the field trip. So that's a little encouragement to all of you to join his field trips whenever one comes up. Let's see, is there anything else I needed to know? Oh, well, obviously, too, lots more information than I can cover in anywhere near an hour. I mean, if you figure there was 10 of these field trips and they covered 2 or 3 hours each, and we didn't talk chit-chat during the rides from spot to spot. Kevin, as you can see in this picture, was telling us about the railroad pretty much the whole time. Okay, so here's a map as it appears on the inside of the covers on Hal Madsen's book, The Railroads of the Santa Maria Valley. And it basically shows the three railroads that we're going to be looking at today. The Pacific Coast Railroad came down from the north, ran all the way through town, and went on south to Los Alamos. And it had an electric line out to Guadalupe here, and some electric line out here too, and some electric line down to the sugar mill. Then, of course, there's the Santa Maria Valley Railroad itself, the one that is still running today, at least part of the total original. And it runs from Guadalupe down towards Betarabia, has a Betarabia branch, then it heads into town. Then pretty much here in downtown is where it ends today, but in its initial life, it went all the way out here and down south to Roadamite. I should have mentioned that the Pacific Coast Railway also went out to the oil fields, cutting off of this north-south line at Sway Junction here at what is today Battles and Depot Streets. It went east also and down south to Palmer. And we'll talk about this in much more detail as we go. But that's an image of what we're talking about. The third railroad that we're going to look at today was the Brown and Sinton Railroad. It was just a narrow gauge railroad that handled the feedlots that were down near the sugar mill at the time. We'll talk more about that when we get there. Okay, so we're going to start off here with the Pacific Coast Railway. And there on the right is a red circled area of roughly what the area that we're going to look at today. And the picture that we're looking at is Kevin pointing basically north, maybe a little northeast, on the south side of the Santa Maria River area, very near the 101 bridge that goes across the Santa Maria River at the north end of Santa Maria. And so it's right about up here, in this area here, before it goes off the road. And it's looking north along the right-of-way. And as Kevin would often say on these trips, look for pipelines and power poles, because that's going to give you a clue about where the railroad right-of-way was, because oftentimes, in fact, way more often than not, power lines and pipelines followed railroad right-of-ways, because they could, A, get access to it, and B, it was a relatively continuous line from one point to another. So there you see, watch for these pipelines, and we'll see more of that, or pipeline markers. We'll see more of these as we go. Okay, here we are in downtown, and the Diamond, the Santa Maria Valley Railroad Diamond, where today's Santa Maria Valley Railroad crosses itself. But in days gone by, the sorry, I had a little interruption there. Days gone by, the Santa Maria Valley Railroad crossed the Pacific Coast Railway back when it was, you know, its own thing, and it wasn't even standard gauge; it was narrow gauge. So what's happening here in this picture? This is just east of where Jones Street ends, or I mean west, just west of where Jones Street ends when you're driving west on it, east of South Broadway. In the lower right to the upper left, so from down here to here, that's what was originally was Pacific Coast Railway. This is basically a north-south line, north being up here, south being over on the left of Pacific Coast Railway. And of course that means that the Santa Maria Valley line going this way is an east-west line, this being east and back here being west. Oh, and by the way, I should have mentioned, the photos in this whole talk today are either mine or Gary C., who was also on the call. Thank you, Gary, for the use of some of your photos. He obviously took the trip pictures of the trips that have happened since I left California. It's great to have all those extras. Here's one of those, I think this is Gary's picture. Actually, speaking of Gary's pictures, this is downtown, and speaking of a remnant, that's definitely a remnant of the Pacific Coast Railway running. The picture is viewing to the south, and you can see in the background power lines. And if I'm not mistaken, the PCRy went right along those power lines all the way south, south of the city through Orcutt. So that's the sort of thing we find as we do this. Likewise, speaking of power poles, often very good indicators of where railroad lines either still are or went at one time. Both of these sections of the PCRy, the north-south branch running, the north-south line running through Santa Maria, are traceable by these significant power lines on the right and sort of normal power lines on the left. You can also see some pipeline markers, I think, here on the left-hand picture. Not exactly sure what those are. We'll see more later, but that's another good clue. So here we are, or here is the group at a plaque, a Pacific Coast Railway plaque that is at a small strip mall in an old railroad building at the corner of Railroad and Main Streets in Santa Maria. And around the side, let's see, I think I have a picture of that coming up. Yeah, around the side of that rock there's a picture of the shops behind it, which I think is called Railroad Depot Mall or something like that, is the plaque. It's mounted to that rock where you can learn a little bit about the railroad. Okay, on the left, this is also downtown, into the back alley kind of areas. Those two lines, you can sort of make out two lines of weeds going through this concrete. One here and one over here. And it just so happens that those weed rows are 36 inches apart, the gauge of the Pacific Coast Railway. And in fact, there are tracks, or at least were tracks, right under where this concrete is now. On the right, we're out by the airport, Santa Maria Airport, and we see two remnants of the railroad, the Pacific Coast Railway in particular. One is that blue pipeline marker in the distance, but the more interesting one in this particular picture is the fence post. If you hadn't already noticed, that fence post looks a lot like the size of a railroad tie, and in fact, it is a railroad tie. And if you look even closer, you can tell what gauge of railroad that tie belonged to, because there's a tie plate right here. It's still there. And there's a place where a tie plate once was, down here. And that just happens to be 36 inches apart. So knowing that that railroad left this area, I think in the 40s, or maybe 50s, so somewhere in there, that tie has been around a long time. Here's the group at Sway Junction, where which is also the corner of Depot Street, which you can see the sign, and Battles is the street coming from behind us to the left, you might say. You can't see a sign for that. This is where Sway Junction was on the Pacific Coast Railway. The main line was going north-south, but here the line that headed out to Palmer departed from the main north-south line. Sway Junction, spelled S-U-E-Y. And now we're out at Orcutt. We can see the right-of-way looking north on the left. We'll talk about the left-hand side. I think it's the left-hand side, maybe both sides. Oh, now I've confused myself. Anyway, we're out at Orcutt. We're along Clark Avenue, and we're looking along the Pacific Coast Railway right-of-way. One is north, one is south. You can see pipeline markers on the picture to the left. These two pipeline markers here kind of helping, and the power poles helping. On the right-hand side, same idea. You get more of a power line pole help. I don't see a pipeline marker in that pic. I'm close enough. Now this one, you know what? On the right, it has to be looking north because this plaque on the right is mounted in such a way. It's on the north side of the street, Clark Avenue, and it's looking north. So I then would assume the left-hand side is looking south. There's some of the field trip folks reading the plaque. And then if you're standing at the plaque, which these people are, but looking south, sort of away from the plaque, you see these power lines on the south side of Clark Avenue, and indeed the Pacific Coast Railway right-of-way goes right on through there and goes south, basically following those power poles. And now the group has moved to the other side of the road. We're on the south side of Clark Avenue, standing in a parking lot or sideways area, or I'm not sure what, looking down into a gully, and in that gully is where the Pacific Coast Railway right-of-way was. And you can see, of course, it following these power poles all the way pretty much as far as you can see to the south. So that was probably a cut of some sort to get through the area, get the line, the railroad line through the area. Okay, now the group is down by Harris Grade Road along Highway 135. So we've obviously gotten further away from Orcutt and further south and headed east towards Los Alamos and Los Olivos. And you notice here that there are cracks across Harris Road. There's one set of cracks, and here's another set of cracks. And lo and behold, as Kevin dramatically points out with his metal detector, the rails, well, at least there's something metal, presumably the rails, and of course it gets a great aha from the crowd, is still under the road. So this metal detector will detect that. And they just happen to be, those cracks, on the average, 36 inches apart. Imagine that. And that exact spot, by the way, is about 2 miles west of Los Alamos, where Harris Grade Road comes into Highway 135. Basically in the same spot, if you look south, that's Highway 135 on the left there where the truck is. The dirt road alongside is basically where Harris siding was on the Pacific Coast Railway. A little further on, this is the location, much newer road as you can see, but the location of where locomotive number 106 had a collision with a gas truck. It was a pretty significant event in Pacific Coast Railway's history. Lots of pictures still around of it. Anyway, the rails where this track crossed the road is still under the road, and that's what Kevin is once again showing with his metal detector. And speaking of that collision, in Kevin's little guidebook that he provides for attendees of the trip, you can see that there are pictures from that collision. Okay, now we're down in Los Alamos, where there was obviously a depot, and the depot is now the Los Alamos Depot Antique Mall, where there tons of little antique shops and booths inside. On the left, on the outside in the parking lot area, you can still see on the ground, or at least back when these pictures were taken, you can still see on the ground chunks of asphalt along the ground that just happened to have these railroad tie impressions. The ties aren't there anymore, as best we could tell, in between each chunk of asphalt. And here's the backside of the depot. I think it's the backside, or maybe it's a extension of the front. I'm not sure which. Anyway, probably where the rail ran alongside the building, because there were the doors for loading cars. Here's one a little more close up. And inside the antique mall, there just happens to be an antique picture of the Los Alamos Depot when it was operated by the Pacific Coast Railway. You can see a train there. There's a locomotive and then cars behind it in that photo. So you're in the depot looking back at the depot's history of a train being right there. And this, Kevin's eyes would brighten up when we got to talking about this. If you didn't know, this is a supposed ex-house of ill repute right next to the depot in Los Alamos. Now, I'm not exactly sure where Kevin got that. I remember it explicitly because it's always so funny to hear that. But I couldn't find where that evidence came from. If you get a chance, you might ask Kevin. One of the things that the field trips of the Friends of the Santa Maria Valley Railroad often include, I come very close to saying always include, is a lunch. We do lunch somewhere. It's kind of a lunch bunch. And on this particular field trip, we had lunch at the Union Hotel Saloon in Los Alamos. So you can see the sign on the right and a picture of the hotel/saloon. On the left is a picture of the ceiling inside the saloon. That's just that cello or bass fiddle, I'm not sure which, is stuck hanging from the ceiling. And you can see that more clearly by the fact that there's a light fixture and fan down here, also obviously on the ceiling. And all these bits and pieces of paper are actually U.S. currency. There's $1 bills, $5 bills, a few 10s, very few are 20s, that sort of thing. And everybody has written something on them, or most often it is. And just so you know, we didn't leave unrecorded, our having been there. We stuck a Friends of the Santa Maria Valley Railroad dollar bill on that ceiling. Okay, we're going to move now to the Pacific Coast Railway's electric portion of their line, which is sort of outlined in the red ovals at the top in that main map. It's the same map we saw from Madsen's book, but detailed even more in the rectangular insert and kind of marked as electric with the little dash marks. So if you remember this or keep it in the back of your mind as we go, these letters A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and H are actually where we're going to stop on this particular day's field trip. It's another nice thing that Kevin got to doing with these, is to marking on maps where the heck we were well, relative to stuff that you really couldn't see too much of anymore. So off we go. Here we are at spot A, which is that Sway Junction. That the intersection behind the group is Battles and Depot. Battles goes off towards left and up, and Depot Street runs along the right hand side there. You can see only just a little bit of it. Then we're out by B, significantly east of town, looking down the Pacific Coast Railway right-of-way between power poles. Imagine that. Same with the picture on the right, I think maybe looking the other way. And here from the same location, probably a different trip. Same idea. Looking down the right-of-way is basically the same as looking down the power poles. Here we are at location C, which is downtown Santa Maria. And the location of today, a PG&E substation, but back then, a Pacific Coast Railway power plant for the electric line. And in that same vicinity, there's another view of it. And if you look back in the back here, behind that tree, you see a building of some kind. And here's a better picture of that building through a fence that we couldn't get through. And it's quite possible, I'm not entirely sure, neither was Kevin, but it's quite possible that is a vintage building from PCRy power plant days. It's certainly on the right location, and maybe it's old enough. I don't know. But it was intriguing. Okay, now we're at location D, which is along South Broadway at Main Street. This is just a smidge, let's see, smidge east of South Broadway. I'm not entirely sure. But anyway, this is where, across on the other side of the street, where we're looking, it basically has a camera's eye view in the direction of where the Hart House stood. And the Hart House was a Pacific Coast Railway electric passenger line stop to take people from here out to Guadalupe and back. And as Kevin always has the right tools along, and in this case, spot D, where we just were, he's measuring 839 feet east, going east from Broadway along Main Street. And at that point is milepost 00 for the Guadalupe branch of the Pacific Coast Railway. And it's right about at the corner of Vine and Main Street. Okay, now we've headed out Main Street, and we've gone just not quite to Ray Road. We're just east of Ray Road. And this is where Kevin is pointing, basically, is where the Pacific Coast Railway turned off of the Guadalupe branch and headed south towards the Union Sugar Mill, the sugar plant. Again, follow the power lines. You can see basically right where that line went. Now at F, we've gotten down to where Car Scales is on the current Santa Maria Valley Railroad. We're looking back north, and again, we're following these power plants. We're just off the line a little bit, looking back north, and there comes the line in here, headed to the sugar mill. We just left E up here. We're now at F, and we're headed to Union Sugar. Okay, at G, we're at the east end of the sugar mill property, and again, to the power poles, that's right where, that's the line coming down from F in the previous picture, right here, or very close to it. We couldn't be 100% sure of that, but it seems very likely. If you turn 180 degrees from this view, you see this view, roughly. This is now we're looking west from where the Pacific Coast Railway line came in, and you can start to see remnants of the sugar mill itself. The big one being the pair of silos over right here. So here we are, excuse me, at roughly that same spot still. We're still at G, with the lime tower in the background over here on the right. And I'm not sure what Kevin's pointing out, other than probably that's where the line went in and then wrapped around or something like that. Okay, we've left Betaravia, the sugar mill, and now we're out at H, which is basically Guadalupe. That was the end of the line for the Pacific Coast Railway electric line in Santa Maria and Guadalupe. So here we're looking at the spots there. Not much left, obviously, out here. There are some remnants of other things, though, like this signal pole stand or light pole stand or whatever pole stand it happened to be from the Southern Pacific days in Guadalupe. And here you can see on the left, you can see that same base for a signal pole that you see on the right, only gives you a little more idea of where exactly it is along the passenger boarding platform. And down there at that station, by the way, an ex-Santa Maria Valley Railroad caboose, number 210, which friends spent some time cleaning up and refurbishing and getting at least observable over the years. That's right there at the Guadalupe station today, and today's station. And remember I said it's a lunch bunch. Whenever field trips end in Guadalupe, we tend to go visit El Tapatio. Great Mexican food. Okay, new field trip. We're going to head down towards Roadamite. That's why these field trips are referred to as the Roadamite field trips. We're going to head down to Roadamite on the, I think we do the Pacific Coast Railway first. That's the one in green. You see on here from Sway Junction. The line goes east to the river and then wiggles its way down through Gary, Sisquoc, and ends up at Palmer. And then we're going to do the return trip, which we hop over to Roadamite, which is only about a half a mile between these two endpoints out in the oil fields, and then work our way back along the Pacific Coast Railway back into town. Okay, so that's what we're doing. So here we're starting on the Santa Maria Valley Railroad. This is the current terminus of the existing Santa Maria Valley Railroad. These track blocks are right at South McClelland and Jones Street. And you can see in the distance here, there's the track block, which marks the eastern end of the railroad today's railroad. And we're looking east, where the track did continue at one time. And back in the back here is the old engine house, still standing then, and also the depot slash office building, I guess depot really. The office buildings were often across the street at the radio station. And then in the picture on the right, you can see the depot a little better directly behind Kevin. And here's where the track, you can see the track is actually there. And those blocks mark the eastern end of today's railroad. So if you go down to Miller Street, which is behind Kevin here, you see the engine house across the street. We are standing, Kevin and the rest of us are standing on the side of Miller Street where the new transit center is, just to give you an idea of where we are. Then from there, we headed out east 4 or 5 miles. The track runs basically straight east from the engine house, and then turns south at Rosemary Farms. This is Rosemary Farms area right here, or where Rosemary Farms were back then. And the railroad turns south, kind of heading along the power poles again, most likely, to the south, headed towards Palmer. If you turn around when you're standing in that location and look back at Santa Maria, Marion Hospital is a pretty big landmark that you can see from up there. As we go south along the Pacific Coast Railway right-of-way, as best we can stick close to it, one of the locations where you can see some stuff is Cottonwood Canyon Winery, which this is a picture of the front door. But the Santa Maria Valley right-of-way, I've been saying Santa Maria Valley, right? We're on the Santa Maria Valley Railroad, not PCRy right now. runs along the back side where the vineyards are, and you get a pretty nice view. It's pretty clear that easily could have been a railroad right-of-way. This is roughly at Dominion Road, on Dominion Road, just north of the Orcutt-Gary Road. And if you're in the back, now we're in the back side of the winery, looking across the vineyards, and it seems pretty clear that a railroad right-of-way went right through here. Interestingly enough, by the way, there's an interesting tunnels underneath the winery that they will give you tours of on occasion. So if you go down there and want to get it all in one shot, make sure you check to see if and when they're doing tours of the tunnels. Okay, this is at the location of the Phillips 66 plant when there was much of a plant there and operating, where the Santa Maria Valley Railroad curved through this gate and into the plant property. So it was a line that came off of the main line, which continued on south. And this is Gates, the area known as Gates. The Santa Maria River is off to the right here. And power lines, again, give you an idea of where the railroad right-of-way went. This is the point where most of the rest of the Santa Maria Valley Railroad line was abandoned and taken up in 1950. Gates became the end of the line in the eastbound Santa Maria Valley Railroad line. By the way, the rest of the track from Gates here back to Highway 101 basically was abandoned in 2002. Officially, the Santa Maria Valley Railroad never had passengers, officially carried passengers. But I think we all, or many of us, are familiar with the fact that they carried soldiers often from Guadalupe, where they came in by train, out to the Santa Maria Airport, where the air base was, and where they trained those soldiers to fly airplanes. So that was one of the unofficial passenger things that Santa Maria Valley did. The other one was rail bus number 9 ran from Guadalupe out to Gates. I think Gates was as far south as it ever, east and south as it ever went, taking farm workers back and forth. So Gates was the end of the line, so to speak, for that passenger rail bus. All right, now we're getting towards the end of the line. Roadamite is the area. And Kevin went to some trouble to figure out who to contact and how to get permission to get onto this property. This picture at the top is the same area that you often see old pictures of oil tanks and oil wells and whatnot in the Roadamite area all over the place. Well, obviously all those are gone today, but that's kind of the terrain on which all of those were. And we're going to enter this area through this gate that Kevin was able to get the passcode for, or the key or something. Okay, so now we're out in the area where the railroad came through, where the oil tanks were, etc. The lightest color here, this road, is Santa Maria Valley roadway. Here's another view of it, pretty much going through here. And where Kevin is pointing is uphill from some of these places where a lot of those oil tanks were that would then gravity feed into the oil cars. And this is the picture there in the distance that you can see is the tail end of the Santa Maria Valley Railroad at its south and eastern furthest point. And that was kind of fun. Yeah, I mean, that's rare mileage. A, you can't get on the property, and B, people who can get on it do so infrequently, that very few people have been there since the 1950s. There's another shot of the railway right-of-way through the area. And then in this next picture, Skip is standing up at where the base of one of those oil tanks would have been. And I'm taking the picture from below on the railroad right-of-way. So that gives you a little bit of an idea of how tall or how far away those tanks were. And here's a shot of a washout area. Rob is standing on the Santa Maria Valley right-of-way, which ends right along where I'm moving the cursor. You can see a pretty clear edge. And from there over to here is where you pick up the edge of the continuing Santa Maria Valley Railroad right-of-way. This area in between is a washout that's occurred since the railroad was abandoned. Here's some other relics or remnants that you actually could see. Railroad ties still out there. Here is an impression of a rebar. Rebar in a chunk of concrete. The rebar impression being this straight line here. And then in this next picture, you see some oil remnants on the left, and some ties and pipe elbows. Well, pipe elbows and such down here, and some old railroad ties up at the top. And this was interesting. Here are some foundation blocks from buildings of the time being literally torn up by a tree that was not there at the time, but has since torn up what was left of the building there. Here's some other things that we look for, and Kevin pointed out often here. This white line across the screen, of course, I added. That's not in the picture. But what it does is let your eye trace the right-of-way that comes along this fill, and then across a gorge of some sort, which is probably a waterway, and then continues to the right. There obviously was a trestle there of some sort to support the rail line. Okay, now we're done with Santa Maria Valley at Roadamite. We're going to hop over to Palmer and then work our way back along the Pacific Coast Railway right-of-way. And here's where we start. This Greca location is in the Palmer area, which, like I think I mentioned, is just about a half a mile away from Roadamite out in these oil fields. Okay, in the upper right, another picture of cut and fill railroad right-of-way, this time the Pacific Coast Railway, I think, pretty sure. Anyway, there's a cut over here, and then they took that dirt and filled over here, except where they had to allow probably for drainage again right here, so there would have been a little bit of a trestle bridge across here. Cut and fill, of course, is to make the grade as easy as possible, as slight as possible. In the bottom picture is a picture of the old Sisquoc Depot, which, as of 2015 anyway, when this picture was taken, is a residence. It transformed itself into a home somewhere along the line. Here we are across the road from the school at Sisquoc, and we're looking northwest along the rail line again. Power poles, power poles, power poles. Great clues. Here at the Gary store, we're inside the Gary store where we, of course, had lunch. We're looking out and across the fields to the far little the hills, and at the along those hills is where the railroad right-of-way is. And now that I think about it, maybe that's Santa Maria Valley over there and not Pacific Coast, because Pacific Coast would have come by closer here, I think. I'm not sure about that. Have to ask Kevin. And now we've made it all the way back into town. That was a pretty quick hop, but we covered Pacific Coast Railway earlier pretty good. Kevin was very delighted to find this photograph in something somewhere of the Swade Junction as it looked at the time. There's not much evidence of that left. Remember, this is the corner of Depot and Battles Streets basically in downtown Santa Maria. This is the PCRy main line that went from the north to the right through to the south and on to Los Alamos, etc. And then off to the east ran the branch to the oil fields. But you can clearly see the Y here. That is pretty cool. And in this picture, we're at the same intersection not too long ago. I don't know what year this was taken, but somewhere in the 2010s, teens. The red line shows where the east branch headed to the oil field off of. The main line was here on the right, actually over here where the power poles are. That was the north-south line. And then coming in from over there, excuse me, at some point is this east-west line that took off and then ran down what today is the north side of Battle Street. Okay, Betaravia. We toured that a number of times, particularly when the Santa Maria Valley Railroad was headquartered in Betaravia. Remember, you got to remember, like a lot of this, you got to be off private property unless you have permission to be there. And most of Betaravia is private property, at least what I'm going to show today quickly. So here we are on that bigger Madsen map. We're in the red circle, mostly over here where the main action is inside the red circle. And I also point out to you that there is a Betaravia guide, the history of Betaravia, that friends made and is available on the website. And it will be included, a link to it will be included with all the other links that I'll put under this entry in the Parlor Car Chat page for continued information. But you can, from the Santa Maria Valley Historical Society group, who keeps quite a photo library, there's some pictures, and then there's also on the inside panels a map of what the Betaravia town looked like. That's this area in the right. The mill itself is over here on the. The mill is on the right. The town is on the left. It even shows you streets, how streets were marked, and where all the houses would have been along those streets, of course. And speaking of streets, this path is basically along what was 9th Street in Betaravia. And Kevin shows you where the old flagpole was for the school. He shows you where, in this picture, the plant manager's house was located back here in this area. And he's pointing to it in one of the books. Actually, that brown edge tells me there is a book called Betaravia that does a great job with this history. So I'll have to remember to put a link to where that might be available. Betaravia book. Okay. There's the brochure, and Kevin is pointing to a photo of the plant manager's house here in the upper left corner. Oh, and yeah, and there's that book. That is the Betaravia book. There's an old passenger car, at least there was last time I was there, Pullman car, not Santa Maria Valley or Pacific Coast Railway or anything. I think it was an old Rio Grande and Western car of some sort that's on the Betaravia sugar mill property. That was part of the tour. Kevin had put up these white stakes that marked spots. There's a number on the top of that stake that matches a number on that blue and white guide pamphlet that we've seen pictures of. Obviously there, and probably still there, are the sugar mill silos, the storage for the sugar. 20,000 ton silo, each one of those. And there's other remnants still around, or at least there were. This wheel has something to do with cleaning the sugar beets. Don't ask too much more about the details of that, but there it is. Here's a picture of what's left of the power plant portion of the facility, and of course one of the silos. And if you look down here in the lower right-hand corner, you see an old tractor, which I laugh every time I see this because it so reminds me of in the movie Cars, the animated movie Cars. They do some tractor tipping. And I'm telling you, that right there must have been the model that they used to draw the tractors that they do tractor tipping in the movie Cars. Whoops. Okay, so here we're a little bit further out to the east. There's the silos. There's that power plant. There's the lime tower, which we'll see a little bit more of later. And we're out here now next to a area for unloading side dump beet cars. Most of us picture the bottom drop beet cars on the high line, but apparently there was also ability to empty side dump cars. And here we also hear tell of the flumes, the water flumes that the sugar beet rail cars would be above, or close to above, and dump their beets into these troughs, and then a river of water would be run through them to carry the beets on into the plant. I'm not sure there's much of these flumes left anymore. And here's from the base of the lime tower and lime kiln, which is what was at the base of it. Just some pictures of what that looked like. There's some more close-ups at the base, more like where the kiln part was. Or at least the heat for it. There's a little bit more. There's some of the electrical components to run the plant. There's some old drill presses that still remained on the property, at least as of that point. This is an interesting picture. This is taken from inside the laboratory at the plant. So you can see that little sink. You can clearly see a sink here with the faucet and the handles. And then through the window, you can see the lime, part of the lime tower, part of the power plant, and the first silo, the other silo being on the back side of it. There's some interesting websites out there, links to which will be on one of the pages of the Friends site that I'll link to, that have old pictures of the plant in operation. This one being one of those many photos, there's surprisingly many of them, what that interior of the plant looked like when it was operating. This was a 2000, the links to this are on a 2013 Friends field trip page. I'll try to note that in the links again. Okay, one last railroad or remnant to talk about is a tiny little one called the Sinton and Brown Railroad that formed in the very early 1900s, I'm not exactly sure when, and closed down in 1979. And it was a feedlot railroad. It was a railroad that distributed feed, a lot of which came from the sugar mill, all the beet byproduct stuff, to feed the cattle. And it straddled, those stockyards straddled the Santa Maria Valley main line right in this area that's circled by blue. And in fact, the only real remnants that I've ever seen or heard of from this feedlot railroad are the stock pass and stockyard sidings still to this day on the Santa Maria Valley Railroad. Those are named over the fact that they're located right in the middle of where those stockyards were. And here's, I think, a Santa Maria Valley Historical Society photo of the stockyards. And let's see, I've got Here's a little couple factoids. It was a 4-mile long railroad, 4 miles of track. It was a 42-inch gauge. And let's see. There will be in the links that I'm going to provide. There will be an article by Shirley Contreras of the Museum Society group about the stockyards, and also in the Friends newsletter of the winter 2019-2020. That issue of the Friends newsletter has an article about what the stockyards were all about. Here's another look at that railroad from the time it was operating. There's the track running right down the middle. And here's what the stockyard and stock pass sidings look like relatively recently. This was back when speeders ran on the railroad, which makes it somewhere between 2008 and 2010 or thereabouts. So stock pass on the left and stockyard on the right. And here's just a nod to the Historical Society I mentioned. Their website address is there at the bottom. They have additional information about the railroads. They have some displays of railroad artifacts, particularly Hancock himself artifacts. And they have quite a photo library. I know a lot of the photos we've used over the years came from their collection of antique photos. Okay, so let's see. That ends our presentation. My closing slide while I get ready to turn on the microphone in case anybody has additional questions or comments. Donate to the Santa Louis Railroad Museum if you're so inclined. Here's the address for the Parlor Car Chats page in particular. Everything you need to know about them are. If you have a suggestion for topics or you want to offer to present one of your railroad passions, there's an email address. Basically, it comes to me. So send me those notes, comments, questions, whatever. And lastly, the next Parlor Car Chat will be on February 20th, another Saturday, 10 a.m. Pacific time, and it will be presented by Nathan and Rob of the Santa Maria Valley Railroad, and they'll be talking about a rail excursion, showing pictures, telling stories of a railroad excursion that they took to the Huntington Library a number of years ago, and in fact are planning some sort of redo of that excursion this year, or certainly hoping to. So if you want to find out about that, tune in. Let me, before I get too far. Okay, so I've opened the mics up again. If anybody wants to comment or say anything after.
Yeah, I have a question. And that is, you showed some pictures of I think maybe I'm speaking over someone else.
Go ahead, there might be.
Okay, a question about the power plant that you showed on the Santa Maria Valley Railroad towards the beginning of the talk. How did they generate the power? Was that a steam plant? And if so, what fuel did they use?
That is a fabulous question that I do not know the answer to. I bet in one of the two books it'll tell you. Or if you can nab Kevin someday, they probably know. But I don't remember that. I don't remember.
Hey Jamie,
yeah.
I think it was powered by natural gas because we're going through some old easement agreements, and it was called Santa Maria Electric and Power, and it included natural gas. So I'm assuming that was actually powered by natural gas, that generation plant there.
Oh, very good. Thank you.
And that would have been a steam generator that generated natural gas?
I believe so.
Created the actual power?
Yes, I believe so. All that is not in the building anymore.
Yeah.
Any other comments, questions?
Yeah, this is Kurt Johnson.
Hi, Kurt.
Hi. I just wanted to say I learned so much from your presentation today, things that I had never seen before on the Pacific Coast Railway. So thanks a lot for this presentation.
Well, you're very welcome. I'm a little amazed and a lot stunned that you actually learned something from this. That's great.
You know, there's been a lot of people that have, since our book came out, people have been intrigued by the railroad history, and so a lot more has come out since we were published in 1998.
Maybe it's time
some more years.
Maybe it's time you did a rewrite, did an update. I know that's a lot of work.
Or maybe not.
Exactly. I say it rhetorically.
Well, Kurt, this is Steve Ferry. When I read your book, this is a number of years ago, I tried to find, you know, you had some detailed milepost markers and things like that and photos of how it looked then, and I tried to correlate a lot of those photos with how it looks now. I had difficulty doing that. So that would be a help, you know, if you could ever correlate some pictures now with pictures then.
You know, I started out doing that back in the 70s when I first discovered the Pacific Coast Railway, and even then it was difficult to find a lot of it, and that was 30 years after the railroad had been taken out, and now it's 80 years since then.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I've done that myself.
Anything else from anyone?
Jamie, I had an observation, and that is my audio is a little, it's difficult for me to hear sometimes, and it seemed to be a little bit correlated with what direction you were facing. And it occurred to me that one of those operator type microphones that would, you know, be right next to your mouth would might improve on it. Just, I don't know if you'd consider that.
Well, it's a thought. Yeah, particularly if I was the only microphone you could hear, so any problem would not have come from somewhere else. It came from me somehow, somewhere. So it might be worth looking at. It is a single location mic. It's just sitting on the desktop here, so I can see where between looking at my monitor and my video and blah blah blah. I got 3 screens going here. I might be looking away from it at the wrong time. Or sometimes.
Yeah, seems like you did, yeah.
Okay, I'll play with that. Thank you. Anything else?
Yeah, this is Kurt again.
Go ahead, Kurt.
Yes, I promised to do a Parlor card chat for you on the history of the Pacific Coast Railway.
Oh, cool.
And I have been working on that, and I'm almost ready to present that. I will be contacting you so that we can coordinate a time.
That would be great. The chats are booked through March 6th at this point, so anytime after that. At the moment, I try to keep it scheduled at least 2 sessions out.
Yeah.
So just FYI, let me know whenever it is. We'll get you in.
Great.
Yeah, thank you, Kurt. That sounds great.
Yeah, that sounds interesting.
Anyone else? All right. Well, thank you all for joining, and we will see you 2 weeks from today when the Santa Maria Valley folks talk about a rail excursion to the Huntington Library down in LA. Thanks all. Have a great weekend.
Thanks a
Thank
lot,
you.
Jamie. Very
Bye.
interesting.
Thanks a lot.